So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining the Californians Deserve Credit Town Hall. My name is Gail Yen. I am with California Competes Higher Education for a Strong Economy, and I will be your host/MC for this event. A couple of housekeeping items. Please use the Q&A chat function to insert any questions you may have as the speakers are presenting. We will be monitoring that as best as possible and sending relevant questions to the speakers. This webinar is also being recorded, and you will receive an email with the recording and all of the presenters' slides that's applicable afterward. So I guess we should just get started. So some background: the Californians Deserve Credit is a statewide campaign that's put together by California Competes, the California EDGE Coalition, and the Education Trust West to raise awareness about policies and practices that give Californians credit for all of their learning, which could take place in a classroom, on the job, or through personal training. This is especially timely and important given the pandemic's impact on our state's economy, with about 8 million Californians filing for unemployment in the last 6 months. As Californians work to rebuild our economy, the state's workforce will need access to flexible and affordable pathways to degrees, credentials, certificates, and career opportunities. So today you will hear from various speakers as they go more in depth on two innovative approaches: credit for prior learning and competency-based education, which help accelerate the attainment of valuable post-secondary credentials. And of course, none of this would be possible without the support from the Lumina Foundation, so a big thank you to them for making this happen. And now, without further ado, I'm going to kick it off with our first speaker, Dr. Nan Travers, to give a national perspective of the impacts and benefits of prior learning assessments. Dr. Travers is the director of the Center for Leadership and Credential Learning at State University of New York, SUNY, Empire State College. Prior to her current role, she was director of the Office of the College-Wide Academic Review at SUNY Empire State College. She has conducted extensive research and is published in various areas of adult learning, including prior learning assessment. So Dr. Travers, would you like to take it away?
Certainly, thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to take just 15 minutes to run through some thinking that we are doing at the national level, and really thinking about the relationship of recognizing learning, all types of learning, and credentialing. And I just have to get my pointer. There we go. So as we look at the issues that are really facing us in the United States right now, these are numbers that probably many of you are very familiar with, where we've got around 90 million students with less than a college certificate, and 36 million of those having some college and no degree. The time to completion for many students is a very long time and very difficult for them. We see that through evidence of how many people go part-time and how many people are not able to complete within the time period that we think about. We also don't recognize when somebody steps away from their education and only have some credits or have accumulated some of the learning, but it's not sealed in a degree. We tend to not recognize that at all. So we treat learning that's not sealed in a degree as though it does not exist. We also have a lot of barriers for students when they're trying to come back, and they have lots of learning from many different sources. And so when we look at our policies around being able to accept outside or external learning into a degree program, if you look at that, you'll start to see that those policies are really structured to prevent certain people coming in versus being very open. And so we have to start to rethink about how we're looking at the barriers and the ways that we address higher education. All of this also adds up to significant amounts of money that are really lost when students aren't completing a degree. So when we look at this from kind of another perspective, that 90 million is the 54 and the 36 split out there, where the 36 are with some college and no degree. And that 4 is representing the students who actually have a degree. And so when we start to look at that across, we tend to think of that blue bar as the part that has college level learning, while college level learning spans across all of these different groups of students. The lack of credentialing is also a serious equity issue. And we've looked at many, many different studies, and the numbers are all over the place. So if you look at, if you go to different federal numbers versus private studies, et cetera, you start to see numbers so far all over the place that it begins to get very confusing. So what we did is we started to look at the pattern across it, and pretty much on average, we're seeing that the white students are having the higher completion rates at about 15% lower for Latino students and around 20% lower for Black students. But what I want to really point out is this differential is really learning that has not been documented. And so those students have the learning, but they don't have it sealed within a degree. When we also look at what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing also that there's an increase in students not completing. Many students have had to step aside. And so the Simpson-Scarborough did a study back at the end of April. There doesn't seem to be some current numbers quite yet, but we will see them soon, where we really are seeing, again, a differential between the white students and minority students in terms of being able to return to college this fall or have had their plans significantly affected. This means that we have many more students now that were on a pathway that have been interrupted. So the undocumented learning that has not been sealed within some kind of credential is it really causes a lot of problems for students. The learners are not being recognized for what they know. And it's really hard for them to be competitive in obtaining and advancing in the job market. They also, once they step away, it lowers their ability to come back and complete a credential, again, because of policies and the way that we are structured in higher education. But we have to really be thinking about how we can capture that learning and enable the students to be able to continue on. So as already indicated, and we'll hear some more about the equity issues, but one of the things that we really need to be thinking about is that the knowledge that we count and actually credential is creating a dividing line about who's included and who is not included. And so when we really think about that, we have to think about what knowledge is being recognized, who has that knowledge that's not being recognized or is being recognized, and what are the sources that are being recognized or not recognized. And then also, what knowledge is bundled into a credential, who is awarding that bundle, and who's issuing that bundle. And so when people get certain kinds of credentials, maybe it's a industry credential, if it's not recognized in the higher ed world, then that is not being brought in. And so actually who's credentialing becomes an issue. And then the actual credential recognition is also an issue in terms of what is being recognized and valued and being allowed to build upon into the next level degree. So we currently have a grant that is a Lumina Foundation funded grant called Credential As You Go. And as part of that grant, we have looked at 87 projects that were at state or system levels across 41 states. And extracting out of that, really thinking about the different types of themes that are related to recognizing learning and being able to credential that learning. So with that, you know, the big one is equity, but we start to see all of the kinds of things that have been the issues that we've been facing in higher education for a long time. Interesting, recently we had a symposium, I guess it was just last week, and out of that, almost every small group discussion came back to trust. And so this is something that we really have to be thinking about when we're trying to really expand the ways in which we recognize learning and credential that learning, and thinking about how we build trust across the groups. From that same research, we also have been able to identify some of the solutions that are currently underway. And so being able to recognize, validate, and credential all learning, and being able to connect that learning from higher ed and industry, and being able to really integrate that to increase the number and the types of credentialing pathways, and also providing incremental ways of gaining that recognition, become all very important in terms of solutions. When we think about increasing the transferability with the being able to have transparent assessments of the competencies and also clear messaging about what somebody knows and can do, then we're actually able to start to bridge and begin to really address that idea of being able to deserve credit for what you know, for all learning counts. Currently, we have a 4-tiered degree system, and this is pretty locked in. And until we start to really think about how to shift this system, we're going to be always struggling with how to start to recognize this learning and bringing it in and being able to integrate it into the current degree system. So one of the things that I'm proposing is that we really start to transform the whole credentialing structures. And by starting to think about all learning counting and being able to recognize learning and being able to credential that learning, it really challenges the credentialing systems. So we have to really be rethinking about how all of this comes together. We have enough history behind us in the prior learning assessment world to know that just to assess some learning and try to force fit it into a degree still doesn't meet the needs of our educational system. So we really have to be thinking much broader in terms of how we recognize learning and how we credential it. So this is sort of a basic diagram here, but thinking about all the different ways that we can recognize learning, from experiential learning all the way up to current formal education. And being able to think about that from a competency perspective, being able to take those competencies and think about how to link them, how to think from a modularization perspective, being able to unbundle and rebundle that learning enables us to reconstruct and recombine these competencies to form credentials that meet the demands. And so as we start to really look at being able to recognize learning, we have to be thinking also in terms of those pathways where they fit in. So in the grant, we have been working with groups of faculty and looking at ways of developing these pathways. And so I'm gonna, for a few minutes, just go through a few of these pathways so that you can get a kind of a sense of what I'm talking about. So the first one is thinking about it as a stepwise as you go. And so I have here labeled the external learning, which really is referring to all the different ways that a student has gained knowledge that can be assessed to come into a higher ed credentialing pathway. And that can stem from actually transfer credit. It can be from military, from other outside sources, from experiential learning. There are many different ways that people can be bringing that learning in. And thinking about how those can be brought in and combined with some additional learning that then builds into things like the micro-credentials, certificates. You can add in micro-credentials at another spot, and building to a degree such as an associate degree, adding on additional micro-credentialings, adding on to another degree. And so students are gradually building up their credentials as they go along, but are incorporating all the different ways that they have knowledge in that pathway. The second one is called add-on as you go. So in addition, you've got still that external learning appearing at all different phases as you're going through the pathway, but students are able to pick up additional credentials to increase the depth and breadth of their learning and also to increase their specialization for employability. So we can be thinking about a student might come in directly into a certificate or into a degree program, but then be able to also pick up additional credentialing and have additional learning evaluated that fits into it. So it builds as they go along. A third one is the auto award as you go. And the auto award is looking at being able to pick up the credentials as you're on the path. So let's say somebody is going for a bachelor's degree, and when they reach the point that they have met a certificate or a micro-credential or an associate degree, they're able to automatically be awarded that degree. This becomes really important when we talk about increasing access, increasing the completion rate, because we have students who step away from a four-year degree that might have the equivalent of an associate's degree and a certificate, maybe some micro-credentials, but they go completely without anything, and they are treated as though they have nothing. Well, if we took it on the onus of ourselves to be able to award those credentials as the student meets it, then those students are actually recognized for what they do know and are able to use that knowledge in a recognized way. The fourth one is called transfer as you go. And so what we're starting to talk about is the ability for different institutions to partner around these credentialing pathways. And because of it's kind of resource sharing, because of different resources, sometimes it doesn't make sense that each institution offers the exact same thing. But a student could be taking a micro-credential at one institution and already have it built into a transfer agreement where it builds into the degree at another institution. In addition, there would be ways to also integrate external learning. So an example of this might be that one of the pathways that we're working on in the grant is that the faculty are designing a micro-credentials and entrepreneurship, but they're also looking at a certificate, an associate's degree, and a bachelor's degree. And so some of those pieces might be offered at the associate level and some at the bachelor's level, but they would transfer back and forth and fit into everybody's degree. The fifth one is called Partner as you go. And the Partner as you go is where we build in, very much like the articulation agreement, but now with a partner where the industry partner has either competency, or they've got formal training, licenses, certifications, and those are evaluated in a way that they can come in to the pathway. And at the same time, it may be that the pathway, it leads people to those recognitions in the industry partnership. So for example, we've been working with CVS Health and have evaluated their store manager training, and that is built into a bachelor's degree in business management. So the degree has been built around that learning that has been evaluated. And so students are able to get a micro-credential and also work towards a degree at the same time by being able to recognize that learning. So altogether, gets a little busy when you try to put this all together, but it does give us a sense of these different ways that we can take learning that is acquired in all the different formats and being able to bring them along into a credentialing pathway that is that's purposefully looking at that external learning and how that fits in. So what we see is that from an educational point of view, we tend to think about students coming to us, getting their credentials, and then they go away. And when they step away, we tend to not think about really what are they doing and what are the other things that they are part of their lives that could be part of their educational pathway. And we have to start to rethink how at higher education that we really exist in the lives of the students. They're involved in work, in family, in community that's ongoing throughout their lives. And we really have to stop thinking about education stopping at certain points and thinking about how using incremental credentialing pathways that we can really be in the lives of the students. In many ways, it's instead of having the students come to us, we need to think much more in terms of how we can reach out and be in the lives of the students and come to them. So that was a very quick presentation in terms of thinking about where we are from the national perspective around all learning counts. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was extremely useful and really helpful. We had a couple of questions come in. Please continue to ask questions. We'll probably hold them off until the end, but for these two, the first one is, I guess it will be addressed to you, Dr. Travers. How are these credentials different or similar to the learning and employment records?
So when we talk about the credentials, what we're really talking about is officially sealing in that learning so that it becomes an entity on its own. So think about the way it is right now. We can record what somebody knows on a record, but if they were to try to go back to school or try to bring that into a degree, it's still often treated as though it's learning that isn't part of something. And so what we really have to be thinking about is how to create a whole series of credentials that seals that learning in and would be treated the same way as an associate degree or a bachelor's degree on up. Right now, that 4-tiered system locks us in, and we basically say any learning outside of that is like, okay, they've got that learning, but we still don't value it in the same way. So it's really thinking about how to create credentials so that we value learning all the way through.
Got it. And then we will hold off questions until the very end. So moving along, our next speaker is David O'Brien, the Vice Chancellor of Governmental Relations for the California Community Chancellor's Office. He will be sharing a statewide perspective on the impacts and benefits of credit for prior learning policies and the work that community colleges have been doing so far. As Vice Chancellor of Governmental Relations, Mr. O'Brien oversees the division responsible for advancing the legislative agenda for the community colleges and represents the Chancellor's Office before the legislature, the executive branch, and the state and federal governments. Prior to his current role, Mr. O'Brien was the Director of Government Affairs for the California Student Aid Commission, or CSAC, where he was critical in the Commission's efforts to reform and expand California's financial aid programs. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Gail. And thank you to all of our hosts. Really want to thank our partner organizations for hosting this event and for making this issue a priority and for emphasizing the equity focus within this issue. As Gail mentioned, I'm David O'Brien, Vice Chancellor for Governmental Relations at the California Community College's Chancellor's Office. I'll be sharing a PowerPoint slide in just a minute. I really want to start off by thanking Dr. Travers for that comprehensive overview and discussion of the key issues up for discussion here today. You could not have teed it up better for what I hope will be a very productive discussion. And it's going to be a very hard act to follow, can't lie. But I do hope that what I can do here today is provide a little bit of the state level perspective and talk about why credit for prior learning and a little bit about competency-based education are so important to expand here in California for our students. And just a heads up that my PowerPoint skills, anybody who knows me, and a lot of you on this call do know me, are not up to Dr. Travers or any of the other organizations you're going to see here today. I'm a man of words, not of slides, but I will share with you what I have and put it in the nice fancy presenter mode there. Great. And so I want to talk a little bit, I want to start, hopefully everybody can still see that. I want to start by talking a little bit about credit for prior learning and California's role and how the California community colleges see it. And so just as a refresher, California has 116 community colleges. We just welcomed our 116th Madera Community College last month in 73 districts, serving over 2 million students. And we really view ourselves as the economic and workforce engine of the state of California. And our role has never been more critical. As many of you know, California already faces a significant shortage of credentials and degrees heading into the COVID-19 pandemic and economic recession. We already faced massive racial equity gaps in higher education before, February or March of 2020, when it sort of feels like the world came crashing down all around us. And now we find ourselves with many of those same gaps and that shortage only underscored, only worse. And so what the crisis has done at the community college system anyway, is it has shined a spotlight on those things that we really need to speed up and accelerate and bake into our higher education mindset. And so just as a reminder, the California community colleges are governed by our vision for success. This is our system North Star. This is this really defines how we view our system within California's economy and within California's higher education system. And it is designed for a situation like the COVID-19 pandemic. I think there were some that when the economy went south, when we went into all virtual learning, there were some who asked us, well, are you stepping away from the vision for success? Is it going on pause? And as our chancellor, Eloy Ortiz Oakley, said, some of you have heard him say this, now is not the time to take our foot off the gas, it's the time to floor it, because we need to do this for our students. And so I want to point out a little bit about how credit for prior learning and also competency-based education, which is a little bit of a newer concept in our system, how they fit into our vision for success specifically. These on the left, you see our 6 vision for success goals. I won't go over all of them, but they're very specific. And on the right, you see our commitments. Our system is committed to meeting our students where they are to accomplish these goals. And so you see vision goal number 1 is increasing credential attainment. We are all about helping those students get those credentials. You can see that we're also focused on decreasing the average number of units our students need to attain. We don't want our students to spend so long in our system that they get burned out or that they spend more money than they need to. We want them to have the supports they need to know what courses they need to take and what credit they have, what credit they can earn for prior learning or education, as well as, of course, increasing employment for our career education students in their chosen field of study. These are, to my mind, the core components of the vision for success that relate to CPL and CBE. But reducing equity gaps, particularly racial equity gaps, that is baked into everything we do in the California community college system. So we view credit for prior learning as increasing degree completion and saving time for ourselves, for our system, and for our students. A little bit of, some of this is a bit of a reiteration of what you've already heard, but research indicates that students who earn credit for their prior learning are about twice as likely to complete a degree. They're going to accumulate more credits through coursework earned at the institution than students who do not have CPL, and they'll save 6 to 10 months in time to degree. And considering that some of these are already fairly short programs, that means that students who are provided the opportunity to take advantage of credit for prior learning can get in, get that credit for the skills that they have earned, that they have learned and the training that they've gone through, and get that degree so much faster so they can get back into the job market and again, be competitive in that job market. A little bit about how credit for prior learning has evolved within the community college system. So within our system, the focus really picked up in about 2018. It had been on the radar for a while, but in 2018 is when the community college system started really looking into this. We were pleased to have our foundation, the California Community Colleges Foundation, supported by Lumina, obviously a critical partner because they are funding this project here today. But we were so pleased to have Lumina support efforts to research credit for prior learning and put together some recommendations for how it could succeed in the California Community Colleges system. And our Success Center within the Foundation for California Community Colleges put together an excellent report. I didn't have time to do it prior to my presentation, but I will link it in the chat box here if that's okay. And we'll also make sure that it gets sent out if we can to all participants. But they put together an excellent report with some recommendations, and that was based on an advisory committee of 24 stakeholders that included faculty, that included staff from colleges throughout the state, and included stakeholders from the business community and elsewhere in California's public higher education system. And just as a reminder, the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office is not strictly speaking a governing office, in that our community college districts are partially self-funded and largely self-governed, but we do provide leadership and foster collaboration. And one of the examples that was provided in that excellent report that I just referenced was the example of helping students earn credit by getting their prior learning or training assessed at another college, right? So for example, those of you who, I'll just pick a couple of colleges here locally in Sacramento, if you're local, if a student is attending Sacramento City College and is seeking prior credit for language skills, for instance, that they might have, if Sacramento City College doesn't offer that course, or program, that particular language, we recommend setting up a framework, and we're looking to facilitate interaction where that student in that college can then reach out to, for example, another college in the region that might have that. And that student can get that assessment through that other college and have it count at Sacramento City College, Woodland Community College, for instance, even outside of the district, right? That is one of the things that the Chancellor's Office and the Board of Governors can do. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I don't have my notes in front of me, so I hope I'm not leaving anything too major out here. But it was really critical to us that we had that equity focus within credit for prior learning. And it was critical that we understand the role that our local districts play, and that we foster collaboration between them and create that sort of streamlined, consistent set of standards for credit for prior learning. So we were so pleased that in September of 2019, the statewide Board of Governors did adopt regulations along those lines, and we continue to work with our partners in the legislature, with our partners, with students, with our partners in our academic senate, and with organizations like Cal Competes, Edge Coalition, and Trust West hosting today's briefing on as we continue to roll that out. I want to briefly talk about competency-based education. This is a little bit of a newer concept to us at the statewide level in California community colleges, but it is something that our California Community Colleges Curriculum Committee, which of course we call 5C, so that we don't have to say that all every time, has been reviewing for some time. And 5C did make some recommendations late last year about how to bring competency-based education standards into our community college system. A Chancellor's Office report was presented to the Board of Governors on this in January 2020. But the fact of the matter is, since then, the COVID crisis and the recession have only underscored the need to continue to develop these innovative modalities for education in our system. The example I always like to use is the calendar, the academic calendar that we're also used to in education, that the fall term, whether it's a semester or quarter, starts usually right around late August to September sometime, ends in December, another one starts up in January. Well, the fact of the matter was this economic recession hit us hard and quick in March. And if we had, and as we look to whatever the future of the California economy is, if we'd had more competency-based education offerings throughout our system, a lot of students might not have had to wait till the summer term or the fall term to enroll, to go back and get those skills and upskill. And that's something that we are pleased to see that our online college, Calbright College, is doing, and we expect them to continue to lead in this area. But we can also proudly note that the California Community Colleges Board of Governors recently adopted in a historic vote system-wide regulations around the offering of CBE throughout the other 115 colleges. And we're going to continue to work with the field to see how this can best be offered. But I do just want to highlight that as part of the development of those regulations, we worked with an equity expert to ensure that the pedagogy, and that's not a word that those of us in government relations get to use often. My academic affairs colleagues are much more comfortable talking about things like pedagogy than I am, but to ensure that the curriculum was culturally responsive and culturally diverse and relevant. And that's something that we know that not necessarily within CBE, but within higher education in general, has obviously been a priority of policymakers for some time now. The legislature, of course, just recently adopted new requirements for the offering of ethnic studies curriculum in the California State University system. We're anticipating something similar may be adopted for California community colleges. And it's something that we're already working on, not just in our sort of traditional seat-based offerings, but in competency-based education as well. I want to just close by noting, and I'm sure there'll be many questions, I'm aware that this was a high-level overview, but I want to just close by noting that it is so critical to continue partnerships as we look to this. And this is something that, regrettably has not gotten easier in an all-virtual world where most of us, I think, have been working from home for many months now. And so it takes a little extra effort to ensure that that collaboration happens. But whether it's with the business community, whether it's with our faculty partners, whether it's with the legislature and the governor's administration, or whether it is with the most important group of stakeholders in all of this, our students, I can't emphasize enough how much we at the California community colleges, both the state office and our local colleges, are committed to working with those partners as we continue to roll out credit for prior learning policies and begin to just sort of start that conversation, or begin to look at how competency-based education can reduce those inequities within our system. Because we are hopefully heading for an economic recovery sooner rather than later, and we want to make sure that it is an equitable recovery, that is not, as some of the prognosticators have noted, what they call a K-shaped recovery, where those who are already doing well continue to recover and get better, but those who are in our most vulnerable populations get worse and don't see their income and wages bounce back. And so again, that was a brief overview, but I am going to link to a couple of reports if possible in the chat, and happy to take any questions. Thank you so much again for having us here today.
Thank you, David. Please send away your questions and then we will get them towards the end. So thanks for sharing all that the community colleges are doing with CPL and CBE. It's definitely exciting to hear that the Board of Governors recently adopted the system-wide regulations on it. So we look forward to working with you. So now moving on to the executive directors, we'll be hearing from each executive director of the 3 partnering organizations of the campaign. So first up, we have Dr. Sujan Jez, who's the executive director of California Competes, Higher Education for a Strong Economy. Prior to joining California Competes, Dr. Jez served as Associate Professor of Public Policy and Administration at CSU Sacramento, or Sacramento State, where she remains on faculty. She also served as the director of the CSU Student Success Network. She was an academic advisor for the California Executive Fellows Program and an associate director of the Sacramento State Doctorate in Educational Leadership. So take it away.
Thank you, Gail. I'm going to share my slides now. All right. Great. Good afternoon. I'm Sujan Jez, and as Gail noted, I'm the Executive Director of California Competes. I'm excited to talk with you all about how credit for prior learning can close equity gaps and promote economic gains for our state. Specifically, I'll highlight some key findings from our brief, Credit for Prior Learning, Leveraging Past Learning to Close Present-Day Gaps, which outlines how and why CPL deserves a more prominent role among colleges and university programs. California Competes as a higher education research, policy, and advocacy org. We view higher education as both a vaccine and an antidote against economic stagnation and social stratification. We believe long-term economic growth for California will be accomplished through shared prosperity. A key part of improving college access and success is recognizing the collegiate level learning that's happening outside of college classrooms. This is particularly critical as more students roll in and out of higher ed. Right now, over a third of high school students do not go directly into college, and many who do start right after college do not complete immediately. Higher education needs to evolve to serve the needs of today's students, and we could do this via credit for prior learning. What could improved CPL policies mean for equity in California higher ed? Our research gets at this question. Without a statewide longitudinal data system, it's hard to estimate the benefits in California. As such, we turn to national data, which suggests CPL policies could lead to positive outcomes. In one study, students earning 13 to 24 credits through CPL shaved 6.6 months off the typical 5-year completion for a bachelor's degree. By not requiring students to pay for and retake courses with content they've already mastered, students are estimated to save from $1,605 to $6,000. Our own research at California Competes, which we did for the Success Center for California Community Colleges, shows that if 4% of adult students at the community colleges completed one term early, the system would save approximately $569,000 per cohort in state aid that then they can reinvest to enroll more students, build capacity, offer more supports for students and faculty, etc. Well, who could benefit in California? Based on our research using the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey data for California, we've identified 6.8 million Californians who've earned at least a high school diploma, may hold some work experience, but have not yet earned a degree. Now, theoretically, all of them could benefit from CPL if they meet the qualifications, but we know that not everyone's experience would be considered collegiate level learning, so the number is likely going to be a bit smaller. However, there isn't data that tells us how many Californians without a degree have experienced some collegiate level learning outside the accredited college classroom. So we leveraged national data that showed about 3.5% of adults 25 to 54 receive some form of CPL nationally. Now this data focuses on first-time students. So this national percentage isn't inclusive of the adults we know may stop out and return to school with work experience that could be applicable. So it's not capturing the full picture, but it's a place to start. And if we assume that we use this same eligibility rate, 3.5% for Californians who have yet to earn a degree, that would amount to roughly 238,000 Californians, which is the population that we use in our research. But it's important to remember that even if only 1% of the 6.8 million Californians without a degree receive CPL credits, these policies could serve 68,000 students, which is almost 3 times the average fall enrollment at an individual CSU campus. I also want to flag that CPL policies focus on veterans. Current CPL policies focus on veterans. However, our research showed that non-veterans have a lot to gain from CPL. Our estimates find that veterans make up about 2% of the target population in California, meaning over 200,000 non-veterans hold work or educational experience that can be leveraged to complete a post-secondary credential through more expansive use of CPL. Okay, so hundreds of thousands of Californians can benefit, and not just military veterans. How can CPL address racial equity in higher education? We found that CPL could significantly increase educational attainment for students of color, particularly Black students. While studies show persistence and completion rates for CPL students are higher compared to non-CPL students, regardless of race, the increase in attainment could significantly reduce attainment gaps for groups who have historically struggled to access and succeed in post-secondary education. For example, although Black high school students are enrolling in college at higher rates compared to previous years, fewer completing and fewer Black students over the age of 25 enroll in college compared to other groups. However, based on our estimates, 30% of those who could benefit from CPL are Black students. If CPL policies were expanded, Black adult enrollment could increase by 50%, supporting success in post-secondary education even beyond the traditional student track. CPL could increase economic mobility for working adults, but economic disparities would still persist across racial and ethnic groups. Wider, consistent use of CPL could promote access, affordability, completion, and as you see in this chart, holding a degree is associated with higher earnings. This is no surprise for anyone on this call. Now, degree attainment may not level the playing field as workers of color still see lower wages compared to white workers. It does increase economic mobility. I've presented a lot of data, but I want to underscore that there are real people impacted when we don't address these systemic inequities. For me, this work is personal. This is my dad. He retired from the Air Force in the early 1980s, almost 40 years ago. Even among veterans, not all are included, even today. The Air Force does not participate in main efforts focused on CPL for veterans. During his 20-year career in the Air Force, he completed hundreds of hours of training. This chart highlights just some of the courses he completed. And I'm holding up dozens of certificates for courses he's completed over his 20 years in the Air Force. When he retired and went to our local community college about matriculating, he was directed and redirected elsewhere and then asked to provide records he didn't have access to. Ultimately, he gave up and he never received any credit for his learning, and his career suffered for it. Now, I'll go over what do we do. So the speakers before me flagged some things that are happening, lots of things that we could be doing, and we've honed in on sort of what we could do in California I'm happy to talk more about this in the Q&A also. So as noted by the speakers, institutions approach CPL differently. This makes the earning and transfer of credit challenging. We need to improve consistency within and across institutions. California should also increase the use of relevant work experience to award CPL credits across segments, including work experience beyond the military. Improvements would involve more consistently leveraging prior relevant work and volunteer experience in addition to prior education and military experience. Incentivizing working adults without degrees to return and earn credentials could support the state in meeting its workforce needs, since high school graduates alone are unlikely to fulfill this need. We also want to encourage increasing employer partnerships to promote degree completion. The difficulty in validating and credentialing learning that has taken place outside of a post-secondary institution contributes to the limited use of CPL. However, increasing partnerships between employers and post-secondary institutions could ease the burden that falls on faculty to single-handedly develop and evaluate prior learning assessments. And I say that, I feel like I remember as a faculty member having to do this work, and it was really hard, but you really wanted to do it. So if we could figure out ways to streamline that for faculty, I think that will be really critical. And of course, CPL is just part of a solution set to make our institutions more student ready. Another key practice is the use of competency-based education, which I'm happy we're also talking about in this town hall. Dr. Alicia Smith-Arriaga of Education Trust West will go more in depth about CBE and its benefits. And for those of you who want to learn even more, I want to highlight our primer that was just released today that compares the differences between credit for prior learning and competency-based education. I invite you all to check it out. We'll include links to both of our publications in the chat function. And I also saw that Gail mentioned we would send out the information to everyone who's attending today. And of course, I'm happy to take any questions during the Q&A period. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now we will hear from Dr. Alicia Smith-Arriaga, who is the Executive Director of the Education Trust West. Dr. Smith-Arriaga has more than 20 years experience working in and partnering with education and workforce policy, research, and advocacy organizations in high schools and community colleges across the state. She has presented in numerous venues on the topic of creating educational opportunities for all students. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. And I don't have slides, but I have some comments prepared that I'm excited to share. So the Ed Trust West is really proud to partner with California Competes and the California Edge Coalition on this statewide campaign to raise awareness about policies and practices that give Californians credit for all of their learning. I think we can all agree that learning takes place in all sorts of settings, in the classroom, on the job, or through professional training. And the facts are sobering. In the last 6 months, 8 million California residents have filed for unemployment. California is in the midst of a pandemic-induced recession. And as we work to repair our state's economy and get people back to work, we also must create more pathways to degrees and credentials that lead to meaningful careers. And as we address the racial and economic inequalities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, we'll need to make those pathways more flexible and more affordable than they've ever been before. So what is competency-based education? So if you imagine that you're a 39-year-old single parent and you've worked as an early childhood teacher for 20 years, maybe you attended a year of college and you never finished your degree, and now you're being told that because you don't have proper credentials, you're in danger of losing your job, even if you've demonstrated the skills for that job. And now you have to go back to school, and because you took classes over 20 years ago, those credits will not transfer. And now you're back to square one. So here's something to think about. What if instead of repeating classes, there was a more efficient way to earn your credential? Competency-based education programs are designed around an articulated set of competencies that students must master. Students progress through their programs as they demonstrate those competencies at their own pace. Basically, competency-based learning is about learning about what happens outside of a traditional classroom, learning that happens outside a traditional classroom setting. So California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And in order to keep up with the workforce demands, we need to help people better access education opportunities to help them advance in their careers. The Public Policy Institute of California estimates that as many as 40% of jobs in California will require a bachelor's degree by 2030. Advocacy organizations have called for setting attainment goals of 60% of Californians with a post-secondary credential by 2030. Now, in order to meet these goals, California will need first to close its racial equity gaps. 83% of Latinx adults, 67% of Black adults in the state do not have a post-secondary degree, and 14% of California's working age adults have some college credit, but no degree. Competency-based learning is ideal for working adults. Many institutions are adopting competency-based education programs in order to improve access and equity. In a recent survey of institutions offering competency-based education programs, 42% of the surveyed institutions reported having a competency-based program in nursing and health professions. Now, based on data from the U.S. Department of Education, California's Latinx students are more likely than white students to enroll in these types of programs. Competency-based learning approaches can help students earn credentials to keep up with state requirements. For example, early childhood center employees must have certain credentials. Competency-based teacher education programs can help the lowest wage workers make sure their jobs are safe and ultimately secure higher wage positions. One more reason why competency-based learning is a good policy is that it can help close equity gaps. Clear expectations are set from the beginning on what students must know, what the outcomes are, and how students will get to program completion. Now, this approach is also designed with a high level of support for students. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but instead, it recognizes that learning is individual and allows for a flexible schedule. Competency-based learning can help make post-secondary education more affordable as well. So, what can we do to get competency-based learning policies here in California? Well, first, we have to raise awareness. This town hall is really just the beginning of a campaign to engage educators and policymakers and community organizations. We will also be issuing a series of reports, listening sessions, and policy workshops to call attention to this issue. Secondly, we can advocate for the following: state funding to encourage competency-based learning and ensure that all learning counts. We can advocate for state financial aid programs that support competency-based learning and prior learning assessment. Tuition policies to support students in flexible education. And transfer policies that allow students to transfer all learning between institutions and don't limit what students can transfer. Lastly, I just want to thank the Lumina Foundation for funding this important work, and we look forward to working with California Competes and the California EDGE Coalition on moving the needle because Californians deserve credit. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, if you guys have any questions, please send them to the chat or to the Q&A, sorry. And last but not least, we will hear from Zima Creason, Executive Director of the California EDGE Coalition. Zima has worked in the policy field since 2001, and much of her work has focused on equity as it relates to mental health policies, as well as stakeholder outreach and engagement. Take it away, Zima.
Thanks so much. And this is not part of my prepared remarks, but Miss Sue Jin really touched my heart. And I just want to share, here's our sailor, just recently graduated from boot camp off to nuke school. And, you know, I couldn't be happier that, you know, we're working together to improve the outcomes. And what happened to your father, let's, you know, do better for this child and grow from the experience. So I'm going to share some slides. All right, so again, I'm Zima Creason. I'm the Executive Director of the California EDGE Coalition. A little bit about EDGE. We're a statewide policy and advocacy organization focused on addressing the skilled workforce shortage, creating pathways to the middle class, really advancing economic mobility for all Californians. Our coalition is incredibly unique. Who we bring to the table includes the California Hospital Association, Labor Fed, Manufacturers Association, Workforce Association, Career Ladders Project, Center for Employment Opportunities, Unite LA, Policy Link, State Building Trades. And why I take a moment to say all that is, you know, we have a joke. If we could come to consensus at our board table, we have no trouble at the Capitol, because we are a unique bunch that often, you know, aren't on the same page, but we do come together on this shared North Star and our vision and our mission to achieve economic mobility for all Californians. So we are really proud to be partnering with the Lumina Foundation on a research project. A little bit about the project goals. We're working to investigate opportunities flexible learning approaches offer, including CPL and CBE's credit for prior learning and competency-based education. We're working to detail barriers and challenges, working to identify education and training institutions and organizations interested and potentially well-equipped to provide competency-based education. Looking to identify business, labor, and community leaders and organizations that are eager to partner in this work. Creating and implementing an outreach and educational strategy. And ultimately, we're looking to develop statewide policies to expand implementation of flexible learning throughout California. So we are working on a report that will detail findings and recommendations as previously noted. Our final report should be out November 2020. So today I'm going to spend our time together just sharing some early findings from our research. This is a very word-heavy slide. I'm just going to call out a few of some of the findings, the compelling rationales for more flexible learning approaches. And this is coming directly from our surveys and interviews. We will make these slides available so that you can take your time to read the full slide if you wish. So some of the things that I picked out of here is seat time. Seat time as a measure no longer has any value with the amount of information available to all. Learning happens in many ways over a lifetime. Private colleges have been offering CPL for years. And it's time that the California community colleges, CSUs, and UCs also offer these opportunities for our students, giving them more choices for their education. And also enables industry valued alignment. Currently, we are creating programs that may have no or little relationship to the labor market. So some potential risks that are bubbling up from our surveys and interviews, and again, I'm just going to call out a few. I'm not going to read the full slide. Potential risks. There is an unspoken bias about the quality of education through CBE and CPL. There are perceptions about degree mills without stakeholder involvement, and without strong structures based in industry standards, you can invest a lot and still not have better career outcomes. So top 10 essential practices for high quality, flexible learning approaches. And again, this is what is showing up in the data from our interviews. Again, I'm not gonna read everything on this slide, but I am gonna hit on the highlights. So what we're finding is portability of credit, program transparency, external employer business partner involvement, rigorous quality assessment, evaluation, student learning and transparency, responsiveness, and that's meeting students where they are. I know we heard that multiple times over the course of the presentation today. Applied learning and assessment, ample professional development, clear understanding by stakeholders. And what the data is showing us, of those surveyed, it has been deemed that 18 essential practices for high quality, flexible learning approaches are absolutely essential, and 13 are essential. So the previous slide highlighted the top 10, but out of all the options that were presented to our interviewees, 18 were identified as essential. I'm sorry, absolutely essential. 18 is absolutely essential and 13 as essential. So a lot of work to make this happen. So we also posed the question of what are the 10 or what are the essential practices for ensuring equitable, flexible learning approaches? So again, I'm just going to tap on the top 10 that are bubbling up in our research. Transparent and clear information is provided to students. Systematic bias and structural inequities are identified and eradicated. Ample supports. Culturally responsive and inclusive. Students equipped with all technologies, learning resources, information, and support services. Consistency of expectations and understanding of proficiency. Ensure transferability and acceptance. Multiple assessment methods. Ample information and support is provided to students to ensure smooth and successful transition. Evidence that demonstrates equitable access, participation, progress, and success. So again, that was just our top 10. However, of those surveyed, it has been deemed that 16 essential practices for equitable, flexible learning approaches are absolutely essential, and 12 are essential. Again, the previous slide, we're showing the top 10, but when surveyed, we're talking about 16 absolutely essential and 12 are essential. All right. And then I want to highlight the top 10 significant challenges and barriers that are coming up in our work. That's aligning programs and competencies to meet ever-changing needs, the lack of awareness or understanding of and value of CPL CBE, myths and misconceptions, transferability and acceptance of the credits, rigid student matriculation systems and processes, equity concerns, technical challenges, rules and standards, understanding and capabilities necessary for leading and implementing, and covering costs for awarding CPL. And of those surveyed, it has been deemed that 12 barriers and challenges are significant. Again, previous slide, we did the top 10, but 12 have been deemed significant. So again, these are our early findings, and I look forward to sharing the final report and recommendations with all of you in the coming months. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Zima, and everyone who has presented. Now is the Q&A portion. So please, again, if you have any questions to any of the speakers, please just type them out into the Q&A and I will ask them to the right people, hopefully. So first question, I think this might have to do with Dr. Travers' presentation. How does the auto award model address financial aid conflicts when awarding credentials and degrees?
So this is actually a really important question and something that we really have to think about how to address because some of the financial aid rules do make it very complex for students to go after multiple credentials. That said, if somebody's going for a micro-credential and it's part of a pathway to a degree that's been approved for financial aid, then that micro-credential fits inside that degree requirement for financial aid. So, there are some ways that it does work for students, but this is an area that we're going to have to do, I think, a lot of work around in terms of really helping students be able to be awarded to be able to attend and award credits without being bogged down financially. So it is something that has to be addressed.
Got it. Our next question is for Sujin or Dr. Jez. Can you provide some background or context on why Black students stand to benefit from credit for prior learning more than other demographic groups?
Yeah, happy to. One of the tricky things about doing this work for California is we had to use national data and approximations. These things aren't sort of well captured yet. So we used national data that looks at who's received credit for prior learning broken down by race. And we took those rates and applied it to the target population in California, namely those without degrees in the sort of appropriate age range to get our estimates. So Black and more directly, Black students were much more likely, or more likely nationally, to receive credit for prior learning. When we look at, and we use the National Center for Education Statistics data, and there's also a study by CPL that found that Black students were more likely also to complete, to receive awards via CPL and to then complete a degree.
Great. The next question is for anyone who can answer. How can this effort, I assume credit for prior learning and competency-based education, complement the Degrees When Due initiative?
I'll just jump in to say that I think we're all working towards the same goal, which is to be able to recognize students for what they know and to be able to credential that learning so that they have they've got the ability to get the jobs and help them out economically. And so all of these efforts, and that's, when I said that we looked at all of these different projects across the US at state and system levels, and we're finding, that we're all kind of going after the same thing is basically what the upshot of that is. So, I think where we're getting is we're at the point where we need to really start sharing all of our findings. I've learned things from folks today and hoping to reconnect with some of you afterwards and starting to collect this together so that we can think about this from really the same direction and not repeat the same work over and over, but to be able to just build on each other.
Got it. Thank you. I don't know if this question was answered. I think it might have been, but I will ask it just in case. So a question was asked around, has WASC approved any CBE programs in California?
Gail, I can speak specifically to the California community colleges. We're still working with ACCJC, which is the community college specific subset within WASC on direct assessment CBE accreditations. So not yet within the community college system, but well on the way to doing so. And we have a very positive relationship with them.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question is, how can institutions expand credit for prior learning to help students reduce time to degree while at the same time honoring faculty's role in establishing learning outcomes and benchmarks for their degrees? Good question.
I could jump in here. This is not necessarily based off of any research that California Competes has done, but my own experience as a faculty member on the other end of trying to grant credit for students. I think one thing that was really challenging as a faculty member is we didn't use CPL very commonly, so it wasn't sort of part of your typical workload or training. So the requests would come in, and in many ways, I was left, I won't speak for the faculty, like not knowing what to do, what does this mean, how do I grant this, and then how do I do it once you figure it out on top of your sort of typical course, seat time-based teaching load. So I think a big part would be just making it part of a faculty's regular job. So like you're teaching, for me, 65 students a semester, 130 students a semester, 4 courses a semester or whatever. There's also an acknowledgement that you are also doing this work around granting credit for prior learning and doing that sort of assessment. So maybe it's reducing some of your classroom seat time, traditional teaching workload to have that time doing these other types of assessments for students. And then also just the training of what is this and how do I do this and who do I talk to? There wasn't sort of that clear structure either if you wanted guidance on how do I make these assessments and how do I award credit, and does it have to be tied to a course or can I do it outside, or all those sorts of questions. There wasn't a clear place to direct those questions.
If I could also just jump in for a minute on that. My own institution has been doing prior learning assessment for coming on to 50 years. And from some of the lessons that we've learned there, and then also working with other institutions across the US with prior learning assessment, in many ways, when we talk about with the competency-based learning, that thinking about competencies enables us to really still, when we think about the work that faculty do around the development of the curriculum and making sure that the quality assurance is there, making sure good assessments are there, that's not separate from also recognizing what people bring in. I think we have to start to really think about how to use the competencies as a way of aligning learning regardless of the source. So whether it's in the classroom source or whether it's from the workplace or the military, the source doesn't matter, but the faculty still have a very important role in developing that curriculum and in developing the standards around that and thinking about assessment.
Thank you for that. Another question, how can we get industry more involved to make it easier for faculty to know the competencies that Californians achieve in workplace training?
I'll jump in here. I don't have a firm recommendation on how. We're still in the middle of our research, but what I'm hearing, not necessarily in this space for this project, but in other projects, is just asking and getting folks at the table at the very, very beginning is what the industries want. They don't want a lot of thinking to be done and then it's like, oh, look at this shiny thing, what do you think about it? To include them at the very inception of the building of the what is what we're hearing that employees in industry really want, to ensure that it's baked into all the planning.
And I would say to drive that through also, so at the, the advising as programs and courses are developed, but also to continue to engage employers through the delivery, whether that's as guest lecturers, whether that as someone who's going to instruct the whole course, advising around assessments. I think there's a critical place around work-based learning that can be integrated in programs that we know is so valuable and that, we're seeing it in growing push towards. And then I think if we do that with employers throughout programs, at the end of the program, we'll see much more success in placing graduates into the careers that they're aiming for. And employers, since they've been involved from the advising and the development through the programs, will be much more confident in the skill sets that graduates have and will bring to their business or place of employment. And then with that sort of closer partnership, there'll be, I think, a lot more understanding around what students are getting, in the workplace that they're bringing to the classroom, and a lot more understanding and sort of like, what are those competencies? What's that learning that's happening? And it will feel, I think, much more natural.
Got it. Next question is, has any discussion been made with Pathways programs to integrate CPL or CBE, I assume?
Yeah, I can. If at the community colleges, I assume the question is referring to our guided pathways programs. It's very much something that we're working with our districts and faculty on encouraging, incorporating into our guided pathways programs, because that is how we reach our vision for success. I will say specifically, in particular for CBE, it's still fairly early in the process on that, but we very much want these to be, no longer thought of as alternative modalities or methods for delivery of instruction, but just to become part of the guided pathways and part of our vision for success. So a little bit of a tentative answer, but yes, a lot of discussion and planning and stakeholder work going into that.
Thank you. For Dr. Travers, can you please provide more information about existing higher ed systems that are using the automatic model for granting crediting and degrees?
Sure. So right now, our understanding is Hawaii has been doing quite a bit of work on that. And we're also starting to learn about some individual schools, and I don't have the list in front of me, so I apologize, but I can get that, share that later. Where one of the issues that keeps coming up around this is that many of the student information systems and the degree auditing systems are not set up this way. And so some of the schools are developing kind of an add-on process that they're able to use in order to do that auto award. One other example, which is slightly different, but in some ways, in my mind, similar, is that there are many institutions, including my own, where we evaluate workplace learning similarly to how the American Council on Education would do and have a credit recommendation. And we created a consortium across 5 of these institutions. And we also developed standards around that. So when a student has training or a license or a certification that one of the other schools in the consortium has already evaluated, we do an auto award on that. So that comes right in. So, so in that way, I think it's just a barely beginning practice, but I think that we're going to have to see this happening more and more.
Got it. It looks like we might have an answer to the WASC CDE question, so I don't know if you wanted to address that.
Yeah, thank you. Someone on my team messaged me with an answer on this I wanted to share with the folks. So it looks like John F. Kennedy University in Pleasant Hill is WASC accredited and offers CBE by exam only. It looks like that was the one that my team could dig up. So
cool. So looks like we don't have any more questions left. So everybody will have 10 minutes back to their day. So thank you all so much again for joining us today. And thank you to each of the speakers for presenting today. Like Dr. Arriaga mentioned, this town hall is just the beginning. We invite you to check out the Californians Deserve Credit website, which we will share we'll post it in the link, and we will also share when we send out the recording and the slides and the different resources that people talked about today. So the website will have the most up-to-date information on the upcoming reports, listening sessions, and policy workshops, and hopefully address any other questions that you may have. So I think that's it. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.